So I'm going to start off, and I'll ask Annabelle to do the first presentation.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me along to Largs tonight. And I'm just absolutely amazed to see so many folk here on a Monday night, and I think it's a testament to the kind of debate that we're all now very much engaged in Largs and across Scotland, about the kind of Scotland that we wish to see and the opportunities I believe that we have to move further along that route when we have our independence referendum on the 18th of September. But a fantastic turnout tonight, and you should be aware that there are these meetings taking place now every night of the week in all different places in the length and breadth of Scotland. And indeed, I was talking to Ivan McKee a bit earlier, and Patrick, and they both seem to spend a lot of their lives now 4 or 5 nights a week at far-flung places. So I think that shows that the excitement that is now starting to really come through about the debate that we are all engaged in. And I also, when I came tonight, I was a wee bit early. I spent, I think, 3 goes round Largs to try to find this place, but I did. And I was thinking, when was the last time I was in Largs? And it was probably many decades ago, but I do have a connection with this part of the world, in that this is where I did my law apprenticeship. I did it in Saltcoats by the sea, and I remember thinking how exciting it was in my second year of my apprenticeship, because it was a job with travel. I got to go to the Cowinning office twice a week, so I was really, I was really excited. But that's so I have a great fondness for this part of the world, and I certainly learned a lot as a young lawyer, as you can imagine, in a family law practice in Saltcoats and Cowinning. I am a lawyer by trade. That's not universally popular, but then I'm not a journalist, nor am I a banker, so I guess it's all, it's all relative these days. I have experience of working in Brussels. I worked there for about 10 years, mostly in the private sector. I also have experience of having run a small legal practice in the south side of Glasgow, so I've got 2 different kinds of experience as a lawyer, and now I have the privilege of being a member of the Scottish Parliament at this historic time for us. And what I would like to do briefly, because there's 2 other speakers, and then the key thing is that you get the opportunity to ask questions, and hopefully we provide reasonable answers. But what I would like to do briefly is to approach the debate that we're having and the manner of the debate perhaps from a more forensic manner. Because, frankly, sometimes I listen to the debate, I can't actually stand it. Sometimes the rubbish that I hear spouted as fact. And I just find it actually insults my intelligence and really the intelligence of people in this country. So the first issue I'd like to look at is, can Scotland be an independent country? Now, the no parties would say, oh no, and we do hear it really, sadly, in the Scottish Parliament day and daily. Oh no, you're too wee, you're too poor, and you're too stupid. Well, could we examine each of those claims in turn? We're too wee. We're 5 million people. It's not huge, but there again, it's by no means the smallest end of the scale of many, many successful independent countries. Size is not everything anyway, as we know. And certainly a small nation allows greater flexibility, and perhaps you hear more about that from experts from the business world like Ivan, that you have a greater flexibility to gear your economic policy to the situation you are presented with. You have a greater fleetness of foot, and that is important, and that is probably why, one of the reasons why we see in the OECD listing of the economic well-being of countries, that in the top 10, 7 of the countries in the top 10 have populations of less than 10 million. So I think the too wee argument really falls at the first hurdle, too poor. Well, going back to the OECD figures, we found out last week, I believe, that the updated criteria came out, and Scotland, of course, would be the 14th wealthiest country in the developed world, and the UK would be sitting at number 18. We also see similar forecasts from reports recently in the Financial Times, and of course we had the very interesting development, which we didn't hear much about on the BBC or indeed in the print press, that the ratings agency Standard & Poor had carried out an assessment, and even leaving oil and gas reserves to one side, looking simply at Scotland's onshore resources, that they would give Scotland the highest credit rating. The UK at the moment sadly lost its AAA status, its AAA credit rating a while back. It has AA+. So this is a ratings agency saying that Scotland as Scotland would have the highest credit rating. So I think really that has to just negate the idea that Scotland is too poor uniquely to manage its own affairs. Then we have the argument we're too stupid. Well, we have, per population of 5 million, 5 universities in the top 200 universities in the world. And I would say, actually, that the only stupidity shown by people in this country is that they have followed this ridiculous situation where they do not control their resources for far too long, and that some people still believe in the fear, Project Fear approach of the no parties. But I think that deals with, can Scotland be independent? The next question we need to look at, I would submit, is should Scotland be independent? Well, I would argue that we operate at the moment with at least one hand tied behind our backs, because we do not have the normal powers of independence that every other nation that makes its way in the world takes for granted. Why don't we want to control 100% of our tax resources? We have control at the moment over the princely sum of some 7%. Why don't we want that control? Because with that control, we can then decide what we need to do in the best interest of the people who live and work in this country. We can ensure that we have control over our vast resources and make our resources work for the people who live in this country. We can be a prosperous country where people have opportunity, where we have the ability to create a fairer society. Why would we not want to do that? We can participate directly in the international forums of the world, including, for example, within the EU. Now, there may be specific questions on that issue to come, but we can participate in our own right, and we'd have a seat at the top table. Now, in terms of the bread and butter issues of the EU that would impact on Scotland, one of them is, I live in rural Perthshire, one of them is the agricultural sector, hugely important for Scotland. It is a fact that if Scotland had been independent when the recently renegotiated Common Agricultural Policy was concluded, the negotiations were concluded, we would have seen ourselves not at the bottom of both funding streams, which we now are. It was already bad enough before the CAP renegotiations, where we were, at least we're not at the bottom of both funding streams. We are now at the bottom of both funding streams. That is the wonderful negotiating ability of the UK government in Brussels. And we see that we are losing between now and 2020 the sum of €1 billion, which would otherwise have accrued to our agricultural sector in terms of the rules set forth. I don't think it's good enough to accept the second best situation that we're in without having this seat and voice at the top table. We hear that the UK is the fourth most unequal society in the developed world. I don't want to be part of a country that is so unequal and so unfair. I sit on the Scottish Parliament's Welfare Reform Committee, and we hear week in and week out dreadful stories of the increased rise in people's access to food bank, of people who have long-term conditions that are being continually assessed to see if somehow magically their MS has gone away. Well, I can tell Ian Duncan-Smith, maybe he should go and read some medical textbooks. We see a country where we are spending £100 billion on a Trident replacement of nuclear weapons. What on earth is that for? And why would we rather not choose to spend our resources on things that matter to society, on the future generations? So I think that deals, in the brief time that I have, with a lot of the issues to do with should Scotland be an independent country? And I would argue, most certainly, yes, Scotland should be an independent country. And the last issue I would address briefly is, must Scotland be an independent? Must we vote, take the opportunity to vote yes on the 18th of September? And I would submit that yes, we must vote yes, because let's consider for a minute the nightmare scenario for Scotland if we vote no. Let's imagine the 19th of September of this year if Scotland has voted no, which I don't believe will happen, but let's just imagine that. What would happen to us next? Well, what will happen to us next is not simply that we won't see all these new powers that they've all started to talk about at the last gasp. If they were so keen on these new powers for Scotland, why didn't they do it when Labour in power for 13 years? Why didn't we see any of these new powers coming forward at that time, for example? So there's no new powers coming. But I would say it's not even a case of vote no and get nothing. It's vote no and get something worse. Because if we vote no, I honestly believe that we will see a sort of gleeful disdain on the part of the Westminster system, and that we will be punished as a result. They already are talking about getting their mitts on the Barnett formula, which could mean that we lose some £4 billion from our budget. And we already see many voluntary sector groups very worried indeed about the impact that further Westminster austerity policies will have on child poverty in our country. We see a leaked report in the Sunday Herald, I believe, yesterday, which showed that the forecast for growth for Scotland within the Union over the next 10 years is not good. And we, as I say, have seen some massive increase in recourse to food banks in Scotland. So I would submit that we cannot afford to vote no, because there really is a nightmare scenario waiting there in the wings for Scotland. I would conclude, Chairman, by saying one thing, which is that since 1945, some 142 countries have chosen to become independent. And not one of those countries, not one of them has ever sought to go back again. Something to think about. Thank you very much.